my Italian food fanatics. Today we're going to make a very famous dish called pasta alla vodka. Actually, it's better known by penne alla vodka, but today we're going to be using rigatoni as opposed to penne because I like rigatoni more than I like penne. Anyway, makes no difference. This was an American Italian dish that was invented in the 1980s. And it became a sensation all over the world. In fact, it worked its way into Italy, and they began to serve it all over the place, and it's kind of gone out of favor. But it's a very delicious, easy to make recipe that I'm going to kind of bring up to the 2020s by adding a little bit less cream than you normally see, a little bit of olive oil and some pancetta. And we're going to eliminate the butter that's typically added in a lot of these recipes because I think it's just too much fat for our lifestyles today. So we're going to make a little bit healthier version so that you can have it at any time during the week. It's pretty simple. The active time preparing is very, very minimal. And once you get it on the stove, it's easy to do. You'll see. A little bit of olive oil, some pancetta. And then we're going to add in our onions, a little bit of parsley. We'll deglaze with the vodka. We'll add in our tomatoes. We'll reduce that down a little bit. Add in our cream. And then in with our rigatoni. Adjust the seasoning. Plate it up. A little bit of Parmesan cheese. Some parsley to make it look good and taste good. And bingo, we're going to have it. But before we do that, I need to give a shout out to Mateos in a city north of Frankfurt. He made a spaghetti aglio e olio. Here you can see the sauce, and here you can see the final dish. And doesn't that look absolutely delicious? Thank you, Mateos. And come on, make us something else. If you have something that you've made, that I've made on the channel that has inspired you, please, you can reach me on Instagram at Chef Argenti. Send me a picture of your creation in a private message, and we'll feature it on a future episode of this channel, Italian Food Fanatics. So, without any further ado, come on, let's get into the kitchen and attack the rigatoni alla vodka. See you in the kitchen. All right, my Italian food fanatics, let's get started. Today we're going to make rigatoni alla vodka because I'm not a big fan of penne pasta. I much prefer rigatoni, but these are smaller, so they kind of look like penne in a sense. They're just not cut at an angle. This is an artisanal pasta, rigatoni that's made locally here in California, in small batch with organic American wheat. And I think if you have a producer that is making good pasta that is by you, you should patronize their business. And so that's why I'm doing it with this particular pasta today. We're also going to add in some olive oil and some pancetta. We'll start it off with a little bit of olive oil and some pancetta and some onions and parsley. We'll deglaze with, of course, our vodka. We'll add in our tomatoes. And we will finish the dish with cream. And of course, it couldn't be complete without Parmigiano-Reggiano. So let me get all this stuff ready and I'll come back. All right, my Italian food fanatics, all of our mise en place and preparations are done. We have the onions, pancetta, the cream, the vodka, the oil, the Parmesan, the rigatoni, the chopped parsley, and of course our tomatoes, and we're now ready to go to the stove. All right, first things first, let's turn on the heat. And then we're going to add a little bit of oil into the pan. Not too much, just a little bit, so that we can add our pancetta and ensure that it doesn't burn. It's going to crisp up a little bit better and render its fat when it started off in a little bit of fat. Now, some of these recipes that you'll see for this have copious amounts of butter. However, I believe that moving forward in 2022 now and into the future, we can take pains to reduce the amount of oil because, look, let's face it, the pancetta will render its fat. And then we have a little bit of oil in here, and then we are going to add cream. So why now add copious amounts of butter and do all of that, it makes it far more unhealthy. So if we don't need to use something like butter, we don't. The fat that comes off of the pancetta is going to be enough. So we will cook this down a little bit and render the fat, and then we'll come back and we'll add our onions. All right, so our pancetta is starting to fry up. I have the heat on a little bit too high, so we just turn it down a little bit. That way the pancetta can crisp up very, very nicely. Now let's add our onions. Now I've diced them very, very fine. And the reason for that is because I want them to kind of get lost in the sauce. I don't really want to see too much onion. We just want the flavor of the onion. And we're going to add in a second a little bit of that parsley. Now, the onion, when added, is going to bring the temperature of the pan down. And so you can see that the pancetta was starting to crisp up. This is going to temper that. And we're going to wait for those onions to brown a little bit. And then we're going to do what's known as deglazing with the vodka. Now, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to add a little bit of parsley here. And I want you to think to yourselves, should we flambe or flame the vodka or not? Okay? Think about it. Flambeing means, to add to make it flame up, and to not do so, we would take it off heat, we'd add the vodka, and then bring it back onto the heat, and then cook it down like that. What do you think? The answer when we come back. Okay, now you can see that the pancetta is crisped up. Our onions are cooking. The parsley in there, I like to fry up the parsley. There's no garlic in this version of it, although there are versions that use both garlic and onions and just garlic. But I don't like those versions. This is the best one in my opinion. We'll add the vodka. Now, are we going to flame or not? Yes, we are. Now, there's a reason why you want to flambe, and it's very simple. It's because when you flambe, what this does is it creates new flavor molecules. The flame acts in such a way to give the dish even more depth than it normally has, that you don't get when you don't flame. So, to flambe or not to flambe, you always flambe. And now we're going to use that liquid to deglaze the pan and get all of these flavors into our sauce. Now, a lot of the alcohol is now cooked off, but not all of the alcohol is cooked off. When we add our tomatoes and have the sauce cooked down, what is supposed to happen scientifically is that the residual amount of alcohol at about 1% after the sauce is cooked will add a depth and richness to the tomatoes that you wouldn't get otherwise. And that's the reason why we use vodka, because vodka is odorless, tasteless, and colorless. So to a certain extent, unlike wine, it seems to not make sense to use an alcohol that has no flavor, color, or odor, essentially. So now we're ready to add our tomatoes. Now you notice too that I haven't added any salt or pepper, because we are going to use pasta water to potentially thin this out, and that's going to have salt in it, and the pancetta has salt in it. We have to be very cognizant about the addition of salt, because if we add too much at this point, when the sauce reduces and then we add salt from the pasta water, we're going to end up with a salty sauce, and that's not what we want. So We're going to let this come up to temperature and cook down. And then we will add our cream after about 20-25 minutes. In the meantime, I'm putting a pot of water on to boil our pasta. And we'll be back in just a moment. All right, our sauce is now up to temperature. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn it down so that we can bring it to a nice simmer and let it cook down. Cook the alcohol out and let the science do what it does. In the meantime, I've put the cream in the freezer, believe it or not. You want to be able to add cream to a sauce. It should be very, very cold cream, as cold as possible, and that helps it from breaking. And you'll see it will amalgamate into the sauce perfectly when we do that. So we'll come back in about 20 to 25 minutes when this is thickened up a little bit to add our cream. And then we'll boil our pasta, add that in with a little bit of the pasta water to fix the consistency. We'll fix the flavor of it and move forward. Add some cheese, a little bit of chopped parsley to make it look beautiful, and our rigatoni alla vodka will be ready. Back in a second. All right, one other thing you'll notice that when I stir the sauce, that I come on the sides of the skillet like this and clean up the sides. This represents a lot of flavor because the tomato product goes on the sides, the moisture evaporates, and it becomes concentrated. So by bringing that back into the sauce, it brings flavor back in. All right? So that's the reason why I do that. And look at that. This I kind of like more than most versions of this particular pasta in the sense that you can see the pancetta in there. These little cubes of pancetta. It's just fantastic. By the way, I got it's uncured pork belly. All right. I don't like adding nitrites and nitrates if I can avoid using a meat with the nitrates and nitrites. I do so at all costs, even with pepperoni or anything that is a cured meat. All right. So we've got a little bit longer to go, just a couple of minutes, and then we are going to add the cream. In the meantime, I'll put the water on for the pasta. If you know me, you'll know that it's a pot of water with 4 cups of water in it, and we're going to add 2 teaspoons of regular table salt. So you'll see that throughout all my videos when it comes to pasta, for the most part, not always. Be back in a sec. All right. Now that our water is boiling, I've added 2 teaspoons of salt into the 4 cups of water. We'll now add in our pasta, and we'll give it a little bit of a stir just to ensure that they don't stick together. Now, you know me, I'm not a proponent of using a lot of water, and you know that the starches on the outside of the pasta must first gel, which takes about 30 seconds, and then the pasta will not stick together. You don't have to constantly be stirring the pasta, although every once in a while doesn't hurt. So we'll come back when this is ready. In the meantime, we'll turn our attention to the sauce by adding cream. Be back in a sec. All right, here we are. We're going to take some cream, heavy cream, and we'll add it in. Not too much. Now, typically in the 80s, this sauce was very full of cream to the point where it was a bright orange in some instances. Now, I did add a reasonably large amount of cream here, but it will amalgamate itself, and the sauce will not be a bright orange. It'll just be kind of a brick red, if you want to call it that. You don't want too much of this. Again, we want to stay a little bit healthy. And I've cooked a larger amount of pasta because I don't want the pasta swimming in the sauce. All right? So look how beautifully that cream has amalgamated into the sauce. It's not broken. So we'll bring this up to temperature. It's still a little heavy. The sauce is still too heavy. So what we'll do is we're going to add a little bit of pasta water in there to thin it out, and we'll move forward from there. Be back in a sec. All right, we're back. I turned the heat up because the pasta's almost ready. It's almost al dente. We're going to put the pasta into the sauce, and we're going to finish cooking it the last few seconds in our sauce. There we go. Now, I'm going to adjust the seasonings in just 1 second. But there's water that has come in with the pasta that looks pretty good. So we're going to taste it in a second to see how salty it is, and then, if necessary, add more salt. But this is the last bastion. This is our last chance to correct the seasoning. And remember, we're going to be adding some Parmesan cheese. So we don't want it to be perfectly salty here, by virtue of the fact that when we add cheese, it's going to be too salty. So it has almost the right amount of seasoning. Let me give it just a little bit more. I mean a tiny bit, just like that. And we'll mix it up. I changed instruments here because the spatula, the rubber spatula, is no good in this instance. And look at that. That's a perfect consistency. It looks nice. That parsley in there, it's beautiful. Now, some people will use a marinara sauce rather than using tomatoes. So they'll just do the pancetta, and then they'll add the marinara sauce, which has everything already in it, and then add cream. Or you can go out and buy a vodka sauce too, but I suggest that you don't, so that you will have control over the amount of cream and also the amount of oil that you're putting in. Of course, you don't have control over the initial amount of oil in the marinara sauce, but you can find a low oil and low salt versions as well. So let me give it one more taste, and then we're ready to plate up. That's perfect. Just a little bit under, which will be enough for the cheese when it's added. It's going to be soigné. Hello, my Italian food fanatics. Well, you saw me plate it up. You saw me add the Parmesan. You saw me add the parsley on there, and here it is. Now it's time to taste this thing. Wow. It's perfectly seasoned, especially with that cheese. It just adds that je ne sais quoi. I mean, nothing beats Parmesan cheese. Although some people say Parmesan doesn't belong in this particular dish, Parmesan belongs on every dish. It's a beautiful, rich tomato flavor, of course, with, of course, the creaminess, because we added the heavy cream. The little pieces of pancetta, as I chew on them, are soft and nice. I really love that. Now, does the vodka really make a difference, or is it just subjective? In order to really find out, what we would have had to have done is made two identical pastas, one with and one without vodka, and did a bunch of blind taste tests to see if it really did. I don't believe that it is quantifiable. However, you never know. I guess perhaps it was a reason to use vodka, because I guarantee you the person that did that to begin with probably had extra vodka around and just wanted to see how it worked. I believe it's the cream and the tomatoes that really make this dish, as opposed to the vodka. And of course, you know that I like rigatoni more than I like penne anyway, and so anything with tomatoes, cream, and rigatoni and cheese, it's going to be good. And it's not heavy and gloppy. You know, this was invented, I guess, in the 1980s. Became a staple on every menu because it was easy and people loved it. But back then, pastas were covered in sauce. This could almost be a meal on its own with the addition of the pancetta, because you have meat in there, you have the vegetables, you have the starch. In fact, along with a small side salad, this would be an excellent dinner. Now, before I eat more, please thumbs up, like, subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you think that vodka really does add that je ne sais quoi to make the tomatoes even more tomatoey and add a robustness to the flavor of the sauce? Let me know what you think. In the meantime, I wish you all the best, and I'll see you again really, really soon. Thank you.